welcome to everyone for this important discussion. We have with us three fabulous artists to lead us through different ways that we can look to art to help us face the climate calamity that the world finds itself in now. Now, our first speaker is Dilip Da Cunha, and he's an architect and planner based in Philadelphia and Bangalore, and an adjunct professor at GSAPP at Columbia University. Now, his work combines art, design, research, and activism to propose a new imagination around land, water, space, and human intervention. So, Dilip, please, if you could start your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. So today, in this brief time, I would like to share a current project that is very much in progress, Ocean of Rain. I mean, it's a project that Anu and I have been working on for a few years. And like all our work, it is driven by this question: wetness is everywhere. Why do we see water somewhere? I mean, we ask this question not so much as artists, but more seriously as designers, concerned with how we come to see ourselves as inhabitants of land with water confined to seas, rivers, and lakes, and not as inhabitants of wetness that is ubiquitous. So let me introduce you to Ocean of Rain. There are two ways rain is received. In the first, it falls to a surface, gathers in flows that form into rivers that drain off the land to the sea. These rivers can be engineered to improve drainage, provide water, electricity, transport, and riverfronts. Most importantly, I would think riverfronts today. This is water in the service of land. India is such a surface, a subcontinent where water is subordinated to land. This is a ground of administration, disciplines, and education. Now, there is a second way to receive rain. Here, rain does not fall to a surface. It rather thickens a wetness that is already everywhere. You cannot always see this wetness like you see rivers, but you can gauge it materially and analogically. You cannot represent this wetness. It is everywhere. You know, like you can represent rivers, as water bodies on maps. You can only demonstrate your engagement with wetness. Sindhu is the name of this wetness. It is everywhere, from clouds to aquifers. It's in flora, it's in fauna, it's in soil, it's in rocks, it's in rain, it's in lakes, etc., etc., and it's in the sea. Now, Sindhu literally means ocean of rain. I know it's translated often as ocean, but we see it as ocean of rain, as opposed to Sagar, which is ocean of the sea. So basically, we have two places, India and Sindhu, a geographic surface that you live on, and an ocean of rain that you live within. In one, water is controllable. In the other, wetness is negotiable. Now, we learned in school that India was colonized. What we say is that India is the colonizer, a colonizer of wetness that continues post-independence. So what we say is that there are two ways to see every place. And we want to say in India, or you want to say in Sindhu, you can choose. There are two ways to read every word. Now take Varanasi, for example. In India, Varanasi is seen as a city on the river Ganges that you see here on your left. In Sindhu, it is a Janapad in Ganga. Janapad literally translating as a foothold of the people, but a foothold meaning a high ground in rain. It is a city popularly seen from the river, with a very distinct face. But then the rain comes. And we see a defaced city. Or we see a Janapad in an ocean of rain, fed by an amazing tank system that is on the other side of the city, what is today basically its backside, the city, as opposed to the front, which is the river. So you have a choice here, wanting to see a city or wanting to see a Janapad. Very quickly take you through another place, the Tar. On the one hand, it is a desert which is laid waste. On the other, it could be an ocean of rain that is a unique wetness that is inhabited by millions of people who live in their own particular way. I'll just take you to one landscape here, the Salt River, the Luni. On the one hand, you see it as a salt river. On the other hand, you could see it as a unique wetness. This is the so-called salt river that we traversed, or a unique wetness that we traversed. If you want to see wetness everywhere, you can see it even in the so-called desert. But desert is a demeaning term. So here again, you have a choice. Very quickly, just another example in the Tar is the oasis. I mean, what you can see. The Oran, which you can see as an oasis or a unique wetness. So this is something that you traverse, and if you want to see it, in wetness, a wetness that increases intensity and decreases intensity, but does not have a boundary. So the Oran that is being marketed today is generally seen as an oasis, as a land use that needs to be protected with a fence. And that is the wrong way to do it. It's a fantastic migratory ground of changing wetness that is engaged by a wonderful set of animals and birds. So here you have, again, a choice of wanting to see a land use on a geographic surface versus a wetness the ground. I don't think I'll go through this, but just pass through very quickly to give you this sort of sense of another place. I mean, this is Jodhpur, that you have a choice when you visit a gully. I mean, is a gully a street, as it is often said, or is it, again, a unique wetness where there's a multiplicity of engagements that come together that are negotiated in real time rather than occupied in terms of land and water. So with that, I will stop my presentation. I think my 10 minutes is up, but I just wanted to quickly tell you about the trajectory that we moved from the Mississippi to the ocean of rain. It just deals with this one question: wetness is everywhere. Why do we see water somewhere? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dilip. And I hope that for everyone listening, if you've got some questions that have arisen from Dilip's beautiful presentation, I hope you can post them in the Q&A in the chat box, and we can make sure that we put those questions to him during the Q&A session. So next up, we have our second speaker, Ravi Agarwal, who's an interdisciplinary artist. He's an environmental campaigner, a writer, and a curator. And his work bridges the divide between art and activism, and it politicizes the entangled questions of nature and its futures. Using photography, video, text, and installation, Ravi poses the questions about ecology, society, culture, and urbanity. Ravi, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you for inviting me to the panel, and thank you, Dilip, for that very nice presentation. I today would just like to quickly take you through my ideas, which have been informing my art practice, as different from my institutional practice of working in an NGO for some time. The questions around which it revolves, and about how to unlock ideas of nature. And they really, for me, are foundational questions which I engage with and struggle with. And it starts from these three statements that the nature question today underpins everything we have come to be now, so far, as we know ourselves. And the ecological condition and resultant crisis, I don't think it's a crisis without a history, has shown us some limits. And the question to me is, can art practice open up new discursive possibilities for our common futures and being different in the world? So that is the sort of the six positions or six ideas I will share with you through my work. The first is, a lot of my projects tend to be long-term, last over some years. And this is the work I did with a fishing community in south of India from 2013 till 2016. And the question which came to me was, is the sea I see the sea he sees? When I engaged with the fishermen, that are we seeing the same thing? And is nature something which we can commonly define? Because the fisherman has a very material existence of living in the sea, of fishing, which is ancient, almost 2,000 years old, and everydayness about this engagement. And it envelops the whole life of the fishing community: morning fishing from 4 a.m., and then in the afternoon, the labor of fixing nets, fixing the boat, selling the fish, etc. So it's a complete life around the sea. And of course, when I reach there, I see the sea as beautiful, the sea as stormy, in a very abstract way. But this is now how the sea is lived with. And it's such an old tradition. This particular image is of the Katumaran, which really means in Tamil, tied wood. And it's the origin of the word catamaran. But till recently, this was the boat they used. And this is the boat I went out them in 3 kilometers in the sea. And there is an influx of technology now, which is being some fishermen can take that technology, some can't afford to take it, they remain where they are. So there's this kind of differential access to technology which changes further their social status and their inter-community status. But this particular image is something which I think is interesting to speak about, because these are the kind of words they use to describe the sea. This is an on-site installation photograph of that. And as you can see, they are very cultural and material words. The words were very different from what tourists come to the sea with. And this complete abstraction of the idea of nature is something which I engage with a lot, that is nature something which is actually there, or should we do without the word? Should we just dismiss the word as nature, because the word nature itself creates the problem of a certain relationship? But interestingly, they have a very classical old history with the sea. And this word Marutam is part of an exploration I did with Sangam poetry, which is classical Tamil poetry, rediscovered in the 20th century and with English translations. These are 5 landscapes of love in the Akam portion of the poetry. And they really describe a relationship of a human condition, of a human life, where nature or the sea is the backdrop. It's not instrumentalized for human life. So it'll describe the backdrop where your lover comes from, but it will not say that your lover looks like the stork or something in the sea. This kind of separation, which we don't see in romantic poetry, for example, where it's very sort of almost very contemporary. And if you remember, this is from 300 BC, it's 2000 years old. And the question why think about it, when did this change? When did this relationship change, which made nature to be instrumentalized? The second proposition is that does nature change depending on who one is? And by this, I mean that does your social and hierarchical and gender position or caste position change what nature means to you? There have been a strings of new writings, which there's a new anthology of Black nature poetry just come out from the US. There's a whole new focus on Dalit poetry and Dalit writing by scholars in India. And the way they describe relationships to nature is very different than you find in general nature writing. So it gives that nature is sort of not out there. It is something which is interrelated with and interrelated to everydayness of life. So, the Chipko movement is one. Why did the women hug the trees and not the men? So we know this, but we don't know it well enough. And it's not been excavated enough either in academia or in our social movements in themselves. And there are critiques of our major social movements also by these new scholars, saying that they completely miss the idea of the social hierarchy of what they're trying to do. And it could lead to very conflicting kinds of debates and the way you want to preserve or protect something. So there are whole histories of conservation and nature reserve preservation, which come from these ideas, which are being questioned now. And so these are just images first showing you obviously a person, a young girl who's a laborer, a caste position, or people who work with mud. This is the old community I worked with who were displaced by the forest for a year. And so there are people who work with mud, and their relationship with mud is completely different than what my relationship or your relationship possibly could be. The third thing I want to talk about, the alienations. And alienations, the word, this is from a body of work called Alien Waters, where I examine both the material conditions of the polluted river, but also the conceptual ideas of how alienation starts. And of course, as this text shows, this is part of my diary, that early Marx, young Marx writes about alienation of the fish from the water because the water becomes dirty and the water is the extended body of the fish. So when we see these separations, which are constructed in some ways because there's how we think of ourselves in the world, then you come to these separations and alienations of ideas of ourselves, and also lead to kind of extractivism, which is part of the colonial ideas of how nature got changed historically. And this is a continuation of the image of this continuity of life and dot called the shroud. The third proposition I want to make to you is about how power positions become structures of management. And what I found in my work on the river is that how cleanly the lines between the river and the land are divided institutionally. And of course, they go back to the European histories of the early 19th century, early 19th century, where the idea of land and water was completely institutionally divided and remains here, including in the institutions. And so we have no place for floods or floodplains. And this is a farming practice which is going on for over 200 years in Delhi, where they grow flowers on the riverbank and they also sell them locally. It's a completely sustainable lifestyle. But why would you want to reconstruct this land and sell it for tourism as an idea of sustainability when this is sustainability? So our ability to sort of bring outside ideas for the sake of a better good, we refuse to see what is actually happening on the ground. These are just images of that cycle of flowers. And I have a practice of diary writing, which becomes part of my work, some of which gets published. And one thing which really which struck me was how the fertility of capital becomes more than the fertility of land. We don't see the land as productive, we see as capital as productive. So land as estate and property becomes more important. The next quick proposition I want to make is about the idea of multi-species worlds and how we change the idea of personhoods to what is non-human in a sense. And this is a very live debate right now. This is a work I did very few years back. It's just 6 images with inscribed text on it, which you can't see, so I will read it in it. That, like a blob, the land loomed, wobbling, starry, bloody, wounded. And how will the sea see the land? What happens when we reverse the gaze from how we see nature to how nature sees us? And this is just for me to unlock that the idea of nature is not a fixed idea. We have constructed it. And the last proposition is through this work, which is an ongoing work for a long time. It's called The Desert of the Anti-Cuisine, where it's an old traditional family home I've been working with. And I remember it as a community space of a joint large family, which is completely abandoned old house now. It's 200 years old. And around it are mining sites, a nuclear site. There's a new, post-independence Indira Gandhi Canal, which has a promise of greening the desert, which it never happened. So I've been investigating these both with scientists and in a kind of interdisciplinary, or some people call extra-disciplinary approach of how to unlock these questions, I think. And I just as a final statement, I think that that we are so locked in what we imagine what nature is, that I fear that going down the path is not going to lead us to, even the IPCC report on climate change is predicting we will not keep that. I think we really need to change the trajectory, which is very fundamental to kind of relationships we have assumed to be in nature. And what those trajectories could be something which I think art practice can help propose. And today I'm more interested in what propositions I can make for rethinking the future, because critique is not enough, I feel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dilip. Thank you so much, Ravi. That was wonderful. And I'll remind people, if you can put your questions in the chat box, and I'll make sure that we open up a discussion with Ravi about his presentation in the Q&A. We'll go to our third speaker, Vibha Galhotra, who's based in Delhi. She's a conceptual artist whose multimedia oeuvre includes sculptures, installations, photographs, videos, site-specific work, and public art interventions. And she uses this to address the shifting topography of a world that's been radically transformed by climate change, consumerism, capitalism, and globalisation. Vibha, over to you.
Thank you, Ruth, for this introduction. And thank you, Dilip and Ravi, for this wonderful presentation. I think you guys made it easy for me to talk about the element we are collectively concerned about. So each year we are experiencing the changing natural course of the Earth and witnessing the catastrophic result and damages, losses, and displacement. My thoughts are with all those facing the extreme environmental and political adversities at the moment in the world around. And I thank Ageas Society and Bloomberg Foundation and the staff of Ageas Society for organizing this wonderful talk today. And let me, on that note, share my screen. Oops. Can you see my screen, Ketki?
Yes.
Okay. The climate crisis is also a crisis of culture and thus of the imagination. When the future generation will look back upon the great derangement, they will certainly blame the leaders and the politicians of this time for their failure to address the climate crisis. But they may well hold artists and writers equally culpable. For the imagining of the possibilities is not, after all, the job of politicians and bureaucrats. This was warned by Amitav Ghosh in his book, The Great Derangement, a book telling a story of our time and posing the ethical question on collective responsibility to fight the violence on the nature. Seeing the violence on the nature, just a sec. Yeah, so seeing this violence, a question comes to my mind: who owns it? With the man-made borders divisions, humans took it for granted and started to think they own all the natural resources and can abuse them as they wish to. They can control the water, land, air, dig out all the minerals and fuel to meet the demands of this overgrowing population, as if they got the right to pollute and leave the planet unlivable. I pose this direct question of ownership in defense of the commons and the land rights. Those are given in the hands of the privileged few, and they are constantly pushing the living ecosystem to annihilation. So this was the work which I made on the pristine land of Mongolia, where the land is being mined, and I'm asking this direct question: who owns the earth? Because, the people over there depend on the, grazing land. And because of the, excess of mining, the grass, the lands are going dry and is becoming barren more and more. And the nomad people who are very simple and innocent people and totally ignorant about what's happening to their land by these minings, the mining companies which are coming from all around the world, from Australia, from India, from other countries, and doing the mining and, leaving them, kind of hopeless for their future and livelihood. So their animals are dying, and basically, which is complete life dependency on these nomadic lands is on the grass and the land and the atmosphere. But now it's completely, the whole ecosystem is changing. So, it's a sad situation to see. And I was there. So I thought of doing this direct question. And so I continued this question when I came back to Delhi, and I wanted to pose this question further on, and I'm doing this questioning all around the world. Who owns the water? So I did this work in Delhi, where the Yamuna, the holy river, crosses the land of 22 kilometers and abused by the whole city in such a way that it must be it might be, thinking of not entering to the city anymore. This was the work, and I used the biodegradable material for making this work, and did this work, in a very secluded way, and spoke to the people and farmers around when I was doing this work. And so my inquiry about the living ecosystem, so I'm taking you back when I started working, because I come from the art background and my schooling is different than Dilip and Ravi, which is more on the skill building of making the art. So, I was coming from a very different background, and my urge, which has begun to talk about environment and about the whole climate change issue, was after I shifted to Delhi. So my inquiry about our living ecosystem began almost 15 years back with my first encounter with the river Yamuna crossing the capital city, Delhi, where it seems that people have turned their back towards the river, and the river is getting worse day by day as the collective will and action is missing. I was invited to do this site-specific work on the banks of the river. That time, I was new to the city and not very well aware of the geographical location. So, I'm talking about the pre-smartphone and, the navigation systems era. And when I reached here, I actually refused to take this place or take that location as the river, because I took it as civil. I used to cross this, place because I was going to Chandigarh. Chandigarh is my hometown. So whenever I was going from Delhi to Chandigarh, I was crossing that river, but I never knew that this was not a river, but I thought it's a sieve. So, it really made me sad, because I had great memories of the river. And so I was really in devastating state for 2-3 days. And then I did the work, and then I got, really glued onto this aimless documentation of the river. I had no clue that what I'm going to do with this documentation, but for 2 years almost, I documented the river in different parts and learned about that, how the drainages are, are open to the river, and how the water is shared by the state. So, there is a state politics, there is a border politics, which is kind of controlling everything. So, as I spoke earlier. So that was the moment I couldn't stop myself but document the river aimlessly, interaction with people around the river. Like, these are the people I was interacting a lot with, like this guy on the left-hand side of the screen. He really helped me with my film, which I made later on, The Manthan. And also, otherwise, whenever I was, so he's a temple waste collector and a boat rider at Kursia Ghat. And then there were other guys who were helping. And then we became a community to talk about water issues and what are their issues around the river. One morning I was documenting the river. So this is the river, this is the condition, and it is getting worse and worse. I don't think it is improving. Maybe Ravi can correct me if I'm wrong. One fine morning I was doing the documentation of the river, but there was this absurd situation happened, where there was this couple who was doing the ancestral puja that day, and then the man was going to the river for holy dip. And I just stopped him, because out of concern, I stopped him because that day the river was really, really dirty. And this was the guy actually who changed my whole, observance or experience about the river. And he left me in this moment of absurd theater of between belief and reality. So, that moment changed me, and I wanted to do this. There was this great urge of doing something with it, where I produce the art and I make this social practice, to speak about my own surroundings, which are getting polluted. And, so it's a kind of the catastrophe of my time, which I'm highlighting in this, through this work, Sediment and Other Untitled, where I took my canvases next day to the river, and I started pouring the sediment of the river and made these canvases, which looks like tar or, or a thick paint, but they are the sediment of the river. And this has been going on between the public spaces and the gallery spaces to generate the conversation. So this is what So these are other works which actually I made. So, our national anthem, which really highlights and boasts about the natural resources, what we have. But, the hypocrisy is that what we are doing to them in today's time. So, this is why I displayed this, our national anthem, which, in the gallery space as a part of the installation. So this is another work which is Consumed Contamination, where I talked about the vegetables and the fish, which carries the high content of contamination from the water. And if you consume these works as slow poison, as the scientist says. So this is another. Yeah,
Vibha, I have to jump in and say that you need to wrap it up soon. Yeah,
okay.
Wrap it up soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I will just share the last work, which is Breath by Breath, and it talks about the air of the city and how we are creating this mockery around our own selves. So, when you read the newspaper, when you pick up the newspaper, you read about the air pollution, and then you see an ad also of the air purifier. So you don't know, is it like advertising or creating the fear, and how they are playing with your mind. So, this body of work, which actually started with this news in the newspaper and another ad down below there of the air purifier. So, this is how I started researching more and more about how the air is becoming the new commodity. And this is another company which is selling the air cans on a very high price of £115 and became millionaire overnight. And, they really kind of inspired me to do this body of work, Breath by Breath, where I collected the air of my own time and my own space from the different locations of Delhi. And so it's a visual experience of my own, catastrophe, what's happening around. So this is, I'm going to end, Ruth. So,
Thank you.
So, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I leave it there.
Thank you, Vibha. We'll be putting questions to you throughout the next, throughout the rest of the presentation. So,
Can somebody stop sharing my screen because I'm not able to reach to this place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Vibha, and thank you, Dilip and Ravi, for those really excellent and very succinct presentations. Now we're moving to the moderated discussion part of this session, and we've had quite a few questions pouring in. So I'll start with one that each of you can address, and we can start with you, Dilip, since you were the first speaker, and we'll keep to that order. But one questioner who hasn't given their name is asking, what does the space of visual culture offer to engage with the environment that other forms of engagement don't? Does it give us a different form of activism?
Yes, I would certainly like to think so. I think this is a point that often discussed and is a concern. I can engage Ravi and Vibha on it as well. And that is that we've reached a point where I think we need to question whether art is representing something, or is art engaging something, and is that something possibly different? I think this came up in Ravi's presentation very much about reversing the gaze from the sea, but also the issue of seeing things differently. Does he see the sea that I see? And And I think we need to go a little beyond that, because it's not about seeing the same things differently. It is about seeing different things. And I think that, to some extent, is, I think, really what Ravi is getting at. And can that be then shown in the same way that art has always been seen, as a visual culture? In other words, I mean, when we go to museums, I mean, when we see each other's work, it is really about seeing with the eye. But what the artist is doing in the process is much more than visual culture. They are engaging stuff. We see Vibha engaging the Yamuna, engaging the earth in Mongolia. These are engagements that often don't come up when one is looking. So I think if one is wanting to speak about the environment through art, I feel there is that aspect beyond visual culture, that act of engaging stuff that must be appreciated. So in our own work, Anu and I were, Anu, by the way, is very much present in everything I've shown. I mean, she continues to live in our work. But when we do staining, when we do printmaking, we are engaging paper the way in which people engage the earth. So in other words, we are demonstrating an analogical relationship with the environment, as opposed to just visualizing a problem or visualizing the environment. And I think that appreciation is something that we call upon our viewers to get into. So it's a different appreciation of art as well. So the culture of art appreciation has to change with what we do. And so the activism really lies in that shift from representation to demonstration, which I think is absolutely critical. So to some extent, I'm calling for the end, of the whole issue of the museum and, the art that is on the wall. There's got to be a very different sense of review of the art project when it comes to working with environment, and there's also the sense of projection that we are working with possibility and not just with what is. So what is possible is always in the art. So if I'm looking at anyone's work that claims to be ecological, I'm always looking at it with a sense of possibility, and not only with a sense of, that's something that is being presented, as is. So it's a completely different understanding, I would think, that is called for.
Yeah, and Ravi, I think that's a good point for you to step in, and you must have views on this.
Yeah, I think we are so caught up in dominant discourses that we are unable to see, firstly, the whole idea of we as a collective is a problematic idea, because we know that men and women also don't mostly constitute we. So this nature question has been constituted as a we question, and there is no we. And art really changes by who you are. So a person in a different geography, a different location, what the person sees is completely different. So I think there is this thing of interactive creativity, which is very much located within human society, but has been instrumentalized for other benefits, this whole categorization. We need a new glossary, a new language of thinking about what it is. And the ability to raise different, to see and to engage with things we don't necessarily understand. We don't experientially understand because they just belong to another experience, another self, another way of being. And the question of nature is all around that. It is not a one question. That's why I suggest, as other people have done, this dispensing of the idea of nature itself. And ecology is a much more complex term. It's a much more involved and interactive term than the term nature is. So I think there are so many forms of these which we have to learn to see, and we have to learn to bring forth. And what an artist can do, any artist can do, is to bring them forth in their very affective way, not as evidence of something. The evidence idea comes later, but the interactive effectiveness of something. I think that's something which art goes into what is, you might even call extradisciplinary. It's not a sum total of various research perspectives. It's another way of relating to something. And there's a big sensory element to art as well. So without the sensory element, there is no great art. So I think it's a very complicated question, but politically, I'd say it's time to shed our dominances, that we know something and that we are something, which there are many, as Dilip said, see different things. And that's where different people, different locations show different things. Black nature poetry shows us a different nature than romantic poetry does.
Absolutely. And Vibha, can I ask you to jump in here and give your views?
Yeah, as Dilip said very well about the engagement is very important. And I think understanding the nature intuitively is very, very important fact. And I think we used to understand nature intuitively. That's why there is, if there is a fisherman, they know the sea well. They know the sea more than us. The people who believe in the scientific, scientific logical thinking. But, I think we need to bring that intuitive, the intuition level has to be there when we are talking about nature. And as Ravi said, that we have to look at the different experiences. So, it is, we all have our own different experiences, and we need to understand the engagement and kind of bring in that will and will for collectively learning more and more about nature. That's what I would like to say.
Thank you. You've raised politics as an issue, and you have a question related to that to all the presenters from Vibha Agrawal. She's asking, have any of you presented your visuals directly to policymakers, to the people who have the power to make the change on the ground? And if so, then what kind of response have you had from them? Dilip, do you want to start? And can I ask the speakers, is it possible to mute when you're not talking, because there's a little bit of reverberation? Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a very good question. I mean, and this is something that has often concerned us, and it really comes from we don't see our work as art inside this thing. I mean, if let me put it like this: we see art before science. We see art as directing science. I mean, there's a certain visualization that goes into science, that ontological appreciation of things. So the calling out of a river, for example, and we have written about that the river's an invention. I mean, it's drawn with two lines. I mean, and we do it actually with a sense of knowledge. We do it today without that knowledge. But the person who calls out a river is actually drawing two lines to end the water. I mean, I ask you all who are listening in, if you can really draw a line between land and water. I mean, if you were to go out there and I ask you, and I give you what a surveyor is armed with, surveying equipment, and say, can you draw the line where the river ends and land begins? Somewhere we're just doing it, but we need that line. We need to draw the line on the earth in order to reproduce it on the map, in order to know our location. But that is a work of art that someone has undertaken. So policymakers, scientists, and of all walks. I mean, life scientists, earth scientists, are all artists at some level, and they're practicing their art in the open, taking it for granted. So, having said that, art is not in the museum. Art is everywhere. So when we have engaged the public, we have engaged them actually through public exhibitions. I mean, it is unfortunate that some of them, some of the exhibitions happen in places that are seen as places of art. Like our project in Bombay happened in the National Gallery of Modern Art, and of course, we got some flack from the artists who did not see it as art, and we got flack from the public who did not want to see it in a museum or in a gallery and wanted to see it in more public space. But we've also engaged the public through workshops in the space of the exhibition. So we are very concerned to exhibit our work in places that trigger conversations, that trigger conversations with school children, that trigger conversations with policymakers, with engineers, like we did in Bombay. I mean, there were all kinds of populations, and there is a different conversation to be had around what we have produced on the wall. So we have to lead that conversation in many respects. Sort of take the art off the wall and bring it into conversation for some people who are so trained to see only, and we have to bring them into the world of engagement and stuff, and get them to begin to appreciate the possibility of seeing different things as opposed to seeing the same thing differently. I mean, I was very interested actually in what Vibha showed with the ownership of the question on the ownership of the earth. I thought there are 2 points that I want to just raise. I mean, one is that we have to assume ownership, so that people understand ownership. And so that's one question. I mean, the second is, of course, the earth that one is pointing to. I mean, I presume that, there's some people who see it as land, and there's some people who see it as Mother Earth. I mean, there's a wonderful exchange, that Nehru had with farmers, where they were seeing dharti, which is dirt, soil, and he was seeing land. And I don't know how they were having a conversation, but he was so sure that they were understanding what he was saying, but they are seeing Mother Earth. I mean, they're seeing soil, so, but there's a third point, which I thought was very interesting. And that is that the text that was written on the earth was, of course, written, on the earth. What is earth? But when you had to write it on water, who owns the water? It had to be written in terms of land, because that was soil in water. So the way we see water is on the terms of land. I mean, water is land to some extent, I mean, and that is why, someone has asked, what do we mean by negotiating wetness? I mean, and I would say that is the primary difference. Wetness is ubiquitous. It has to be engaged. I mean, how do you sort of come to terms with something that you are within? And, you can only engage this ubiquity of wetness, because wetness is evaporating, it's precipitating, it is, it's in soil, it's in everything. I mean, I do this, I'm catching wetness, if you will. So, I mean, I am wetness. A cucumber is 96% wet. What is so interesting is that the sea is 96.5% water, whereas a cucumber is 96% water. But you don't see the cucumber as a water body. You see the sea as a water body, so because you can control it. So water is controllable. Wetness is not. When you appreciate ubiquity, you don't move towards control. You move to negotiation. And so, yeah, sorry. I mean, I think I'm wandering now, but I think I should stop there.
Thank you. And Ravi, would you like to jump in?
So I've spent the last 30 years as part of an environmental group working with policymakers, and policymakers are not ubiquitous the same all over the world. So in Colombia, they're different. In India, they're different. In Europe, they're different. So policymakers also have a cultural construct, and they're part of social movements, social influences. In Colombia, you have different transgender rights than you have other parts of the world. You have different, Ecuador have different environmental rights than other parts of the world in terms of indigeneity. The idea of ownership of land is completely different in Uruguay than it is in India. So there are many, many differences through which policymakers engage. What the problem has become is that policymakers tend to see this whole idea of development and progress as a science question, as a question of evidence and science. And I think I've been part of several national policy groups over the last 30 years, and they all tend to be science, engineer-oriented and male-dominated. And it's very hard to get another point of view in there. And of course, if you come in as many of them don't even know I'm an artist because I refuse to state that. If I say I'm an artist, they will not take me seriously as an engineer. So there's a very big gap into how policymakers are so dependent on what is science and what is outside science. And it's a critique of the scientific, of how science has gained a particular kind of knowing the world for the future. And it's a struggle. And I think part of my giving up on attending and negotiating in UN conferences over the last years is, why would I spend a whole night negotiating one word in a legal text, which really, in the end of the day, anybody can flout and means nothing. These are all words. So I really felt at some point 15 years back that it's really not something I want to do with my life. And it might sound true, like a cynical answer to a question. But I think the climate change crisis is not going to be solved by the COP processes. And I think we need another kind of trajectory and orientation.
Vibha, does that ring true for you?
So to answer your question is basically, there is as Ravi and Dilip already mentioned, there is a constant denial from the government bodies. So, the people who are sitting like cops, as Ravi mentioned, so there is a constant denial. So, for them, art is nothing, so the art is not going to create any conversation for them. This question is always posed to me because, people want to know that why I'm working on this issue, why, so is it bringing any change or not? But if I will not ask the question today, then I will be responsible for my own tomorrow. So I think in that sense, I need to pose a question. So that is why I feel that all our work, people who are working around the environmental issues, and through art, it becomes an easy story narrative, so it becomes easy to reach to the masses. So, and I think for me to do that kind of, the kind of intervention within the public spaces is very, very important. And I feel that I will continue with my journey, to talk about environment and whatever I can do for it, because I think this is the urgent issue we all have to deal with, or we already are dealing with. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll take another question. This one is from Faisal Anwar, and he's asking, when we deconstruct or reconstruct scientists' research into visual interpretations, it offers us a new way to look at these questions and problems, but it also adds a really complex visible layer. Do we need to worry about making it accessible for the people who we're trying to engage? Dilip, do you want to tackle that first?
Yeah, sure. I did read that question, and to some extent, when I said that there was art before science, and versus, I should say also versus representative art. I think I'm making a serious distinction that we can bring into this question. I think it is true that today, with the level of critique that artists are engaged in, it does sort of complexify, let's say, what scientists are doing, in trying to communicate, say, a problem, with climate change or with, and artists come in with a sense that this is the way to see things, or there are multiple ways of seeing this. And sometimes you can slip out of the problem and make things more difficult for scientists actually to make their point. And this is where, I would say that one has to see what artists are doing differently and that they are changing, let us just say, changing the topic of conversation. I mean, that's the way I would like to see what artists are doing. I realize that many are doing, are just representing what scientists are what scientists are talking about. They're representing the problem. And I often ask them, I said, when you represent the problem like this, it's true that you are carrying the scientist's message, to a wider audience, making them aware of some things. But you are also repeating the scientist's language, embracing the scientist's language. So I would think that is problematic to me. Here I will just take an example of Ravi. I started it, I didn't complete it, but when you talk about reversing the gaze of the sea, I think it's a wonderful question to ask. That here you're looking at the sea, on the terms of land. How would the sea look back at land? And I would think that one cannot take that question very lightly. And it's not about reversing the gaze, because the sea has been constructed by land. It is, so you always see the sea beyond land's edge. But when I am at sea, I don't see an edge. A sea doesn't have an edge. A sea is evaporating all the time. It's circulating, it's moving. Does it have land? Does land exist beyond its edge when it does not have an edge at all? It's not part of the sea to have an edge. So when I am at sea, in a boat, I don't see land beyond an edge. I see land rising from the depth. This is the point we made in Bombay, that if I have to be on the terms of the sea, I have to speak the language of the sea. I can't speak the language of land from the sea. And so it's not just about reversing the gaze. It is about reconstituting the ocean. And that to some extent is what we did in Invention of Rivers. When we looked at the ocean as everywhere, the ocean is not just salt water. The ocean is constantly, is surrounding us. So to see through the eyes, to reverse, if you will, the gaze, is to embrace something a lot more complex. So to come back to the question, to Faisal's question, it is true that we need to problematize what scientists see, and we need to make. We cannot just embrace ecology today. Ecology, I believe, and I don't want to go into my thesis now on Ocean of Rain, in the text, and who constructs the Earth's surface, and why do we see ourselves as living on a surface? Why don't we see ourselves living in a wetness between clouds and aquifers? I'm questioning the very ground of science, and how we have come to believe what scientists see. And I think that is problematic. So I'm calling for two things here. I'm calling for going beyond what scientists, are talking about and questioning the art through it that they are taking for granted in their science. And secondly, dealing with the issues that they are concerned with, but not on their terms. On terms that could be, so I'm thinking of the indigenous person. Did they see land at all? Or did you construct land and then colonize them? So this is where we need to be with art, and so I would think that I'm going beyond that question, I think that Faisal is asking, Well, I hope I've also answered it.
Thank you, Dilip. Ravi, what's your views on this? Do you think it's problematic to simplify it too much?
At one very practical level, art and science is the new go-to in art practice nowadays. There are art and science residencies opening up everywhere. Many scientist labs in Europe have now artist residencies. It's a thing to go to. But the question, which, as Dilip also pointed towards, I think, is the terms of those collaborations, because normally it goes to visual design, that can you represent my work differently? And I've been working on here in Switzerland on glaciers, and the first question they ask, can you help us visualize what you're going to say, communicate? I think the problem is very basic. It's a problem of the process of science itself. When I was working with the fishermen, they knew that the sea was rising. They knew that everything was changing around them. But we somehow need to communicate that back to them. And I think there's a question which has been talked about a lot. How is the process of science? Does it create another hierarchy of top-down information flows, or is it collaborative? And do we need to communicate that, or do we need to find ways in which information and knowledge is created, which is collaborative? So any art and science collaboration needs to go to fundamentals. It has to be mutual respect for each other, but also scientists have to see the limits of science. And it's very hard for scientists to do that. See that the limits, because they have such a huge influence, and they are true in many cases. But what they're also not seeing is what is outside their bubble. So, of course, indigenous knowledge is one very sort of live way in which people are talking about this, about different relationships, different exchanges, different reciprocities with nature, and different ways of knowing nature. It's been talked about for a long time in terms of what kind of knowledge systems do people who live with nature or with ecosystems produce and have. And so there's this framing, and in some ways, it is also highly extractivist. For example, the way the classification system of plants has been made, we don't know where those plants come from. We don't know the stories of when they came from South America to Spain, and they formed part of the Linus classification system. What was erased? So many of these glossaries of knowledge have been erased. We don't know their local names. We don't know who collected them. And of course, this whole talk of decolonizing science is happening now and decolonizing museums. But it requires mutual respect that we don't know all. And there are some scientists who do that, but it's very hard position for scientists to take.
Thank you, Ravi. Vibha, what's your relationship between science and art? Do you think you've translated?
I'll come from the emotional space, and science brings us information, but it is not it's not the only knowledge. I think there is an intuitive knowledge, and being an artist, I think we all experience our different intuitive knowledge, and there is a relationship with light. There's a relationship with plants. There is a relationship with, the observation of light and shade on your face. So, these are the things which informs you about your surroundings. I think we have forgotten that knowledge, or we are layering it with other kind of scientific knowledge and other logical thinking. And I think Ravi very well put it together, saying that there has to be a mutual understanding and mutual respect towards art and science. Then only there is and it is important to have that collaboration for sure, if we want to kind of have this imagination and the solution together. So, they have to go hand in hand. So they have to understand there is an imaginative power or maybe there is an imagination through artists and writers, which can be used to solve a lot of other mysteries. The nature is a big mystery for all of us. And I think we need to kind of collectively think together. Yeah.
Thanks, Vibha. For all of you, there was an interesting question posted by an anonymous poster early on, which is asking all three of you, which comes first, the project or the site of the project, given all of you have your projects, your art so grounded in nature, and the site of your projects, whether it's the banks of the Yamuna or the steppes of Mongolia. Does the concept of the project come first, or does the river or the steppes come first? Vibha, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very tricky question. It's very subconscious. It's very organic process. I won't say that what comes first, because with the Yamuna project, it was very organic, because I didn't even think about it, what I'm going to do about that documentation, which I'm doing. And then it was a sudden urge. So, it is like, you get this urge of doing something as an artist. So, you want to paint, so that was the urge to work around the river at that time. And Mongolia, yes, because I was invited and it was a land art Mongolia Biennale. So I was already thinking about the ideas. But yes, I gave myself a time to go there and think about it. But no doubt, I was reading about the political and the environmental issues before I left. And then the project was kind of building in my head already. So, it depends project to project or, the work to work. And sometimes nothing happens. I was working last year on a project for which I have, I was doing research for almost 4 months. And, finally, when I started making it, it didn't make any sense. So, I was like, no, I can't do this right now. Maybe I need to give it more time. So, it depends. So, art has no kind of linear methodology. Every artist works differently. So I think, leave it there.
Thank you. Ravi, what about you? Does the space come first or does the idea of the project?
So on my research environmental practice, it's very well worked out. What are the important questions? What needs to be asked? What needs to be answered? With my personal artistic practice, it's really kind of, I feel some energy somewhere about something. And it's hard to describe it more and why the energy, a whole lot of queries and wanting to go deeper and translates into various mediums and then translated. So there's many levels of translations which go for myself. But since my project tend to be over time, something sustains that energy. But I also know there's an exhaustion at one point. So I know specifically that at this point, I didn't want to do that anymore. So, and I cannot explain that. It's just that there's an exhaustion, or there's a point in which you're saying, okay, I have now done what I need to do as this, and you do it something else. So that's all I can say.
Dilip, what about you? How do you choose? I think you're on mute.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is a question that really gets to the heart of what we do. And I think, in the case of, say, Bombay, or, we were, everybody sees an island, and we are educated to see an island, the island city of Bombay. When we went to the Mississippi, we were educated to see a river, the Mississippi River. And everything is organized around the Mississippi River, and so if you go to the Ganga, we use the term Ganga. For me, Ganga is rain, Ganges is a river, but we are drawn to the river. You go to Varanasi to see a city on the river, but then we begin to question this. I mean, is this what it is? And so through art, and this is what I mean by engagement. So I would say that space comes first, because that's the way we're educated. I mean, I go there and not here. I mean, I don't go to Mount Everest to see Bombay, and I don't go to the middle of the ocean, to see the Mississippi. There is a certain way in which we are educated to see on geographic terms, but then we question that. We say that who has made us see this? And is Bombay an island? And maybe that's where the problem begins, And so this is where I want to sort of emphasize this, that in the last conversation the last question, that the art and the distinction between art and science, the scientist is an artist in denial. They deny the art that has gone into their science. And it is our job, I feel, both me as an educator, as well as an artist and a designer, that this is what I want to do. I want to reveal the artistry in the geographer, the artistry in the physicist, who takes art for granted. And that aspect of art that is taken for granted, the visualizing of their things, whether it is a cell or whether it is a river or whether it is an island. So when we engage, when Anu and I, went to Bombay or went to the Mississippi or went to Bangalore, we did, I would think, I think what Vibha and Ravi, I feel, do. That we engage. Vibha used the term emotional. I don't know whether I would use emotional in our work, but I would say that we suspend certain categories that we have been educated, that we consciously we are conscious that we have been educated into. And we ask, I mean, is it possible to get beyond this? And then through drawing, through photography, when we put things together, then we begin to see, we see different things emerge. And we don't then second guess what an indigenous person would see or a local person would see. What we would do is actually we say that it's possible that they saw this way. It's possible that they saw this. It's possible that they saw this. And so that is how we begin to shake the foundations of what we ourselves took for granted when we began, and what textbooks and what history books and what geography books take for granted to be, sort of defined in some particular way. So I would think that that's how we, like even a question that was raised here, I saw, on the well, and what one, the wells of Jodhpur. And I would say that, what we would go, I mean, there's a tendency to see a well as a hole in the ground that gives you water, or, a place of water. And we see a well, we are drawn to see a well, or we would like, I mean, I would think in our engagements in our engagements, we have come to see the well, not as something that is there, but as something that inhabits this zone between clouds and aquifers that is much more open to what we've been educated to see as something, as an object that is there, that can be controlled, that I go and get water from, and I'm sure that there are people who see the well, much more in this circuitous world of wetness, wherein they are consciously looking at the clouds, and seeing the well, So can I bring the clouds into the well, and can I bring the ocean into the well, because it's all, that's the way wetness moves. It's everywhere, So I negotiate the well. Then I do not control the waters of the well, So that's how I would think that we approach issues.
Okay, thank you. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. The next question we have is from Harsh Bhati. He is asking about this UNESCO-driven convention between heritage being divided between cultural and natural. So cultural heritage dominance over natural heritage. And he's asking, do you all think that this dichotomy has played a strong role in the creation around claims of wanted and unwanted land use, and then how that is translated to how we see the oceans and how Indigenous communities and forest-dependent communities see them? Dilip, do you want to take this since you're still on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel that, I've sort of answered some of this question actually in my wandering answers to other questions. But I think it's extremely problematic. I mean, this distinction between nature and culture. I mean, I think it has come out of a particular structuring of the world and knowledge to suit, I would think, much of the engineering of water and land that we see going around. That is the problem, I would think, with that's facing us today. I mean, all the crisis. You can see where I've been going with some of the things that I question. I mean, I don't take nature for granted at all. I mean, that is when people speak of nature, and I think Ravi has already brought this up to some extent. I mean, I think there's a vocabulary that you embrace. So you take the river and, you say that animals go to the river to drink. I mean, animals don't see a river. I mean, they see wetness, I mean, they might see moving wetness. They see wetness in a particular form, but they don't see a river. They don't know what a river is, I mean, and so, there's a certain language that we have embraced of science, and this thing that we have labeled nature, and things then that we don't, that we attribute to humans, we call culture. And then today it's made even more complex. We say even the views of nature are culture. So I say, sorry, that's not true at all. Because there are cultures that not necessarily embrace nature, or there are people that do not see this nature and culture. So we are putting terms onto people that are problematic. And I think that this is where Anu and I, would engage the particular. We did not get into these generic. So we did not embrace this idea of nature and culture and things like that when we engaged Bangalore, when we engaged Mississippi, when we engaged things. We just took a name. We said Bangalore, okay, it is a there, and we began to construct a new language of place, or a possible language of place. We didn't see newness, but we saw possibilities, and we said that if you embrace this language, you get here. If you embrace that language, you go there, and maybe the local people, engage this, and they've never been considered to before. So let's try it out. Let's see where it goes. So it's that sort of a world where we don't work with generalities or generic categories, but we work with particular experiences and practices.
Okay, thank you. Ravi and Vibha, we've got a couple of minutes left. If you would both like to address the question. Ravi, if you could go first.
I agree with a lot what Dilip says, but I just want to reiterate that many of these categories are from a human gaze. And there are a whole history of this, how we've come to be like this. And of course, UNESCO does some very good work in terms of preserving outside of what is happening in many parts of the world, because many cultural sites are, whatever we call them, are being destroyed in any case for other projects. But given, there's a limit to what it can do in that sense. So the critique is more in terms of how politically these words are constructed. And I think Dilip was pointing towards that. And the thing I'm saying is that we need to, this is the way in which the Anthropocene view has become. And part of the future is how to de-anthropocize this view, how to see us as part of a multitude and a heterogeneity of worlds. And it's going to be very hard to do that now, because there's such a power of global capital and global finance, which is driving all processes. So I think it's a very fundamental shift in how we see ourselves in the world, as basic as that, and how we allow other people to see themselves in the world. And I think the ecological crisis today points towards a very foundational crisis of human society, because we even have not met our stated goals of liberty and equality. If you look at things like the Gini index in say India is one of the worst Gini indexes in the world. The global inequality index. Where are these goals of equality and liberty? So something foundationally has gone. We have climate change now, I think, which is actually part of that thing. It does not come from the outside. It is part of that progression. And we need to go back and rethink and relook elsewhere of what this relationship we have to the planet.
Yeah. Okay. Vibha, do you have...
No, I think it's very well answered by Ravi and Dilip. But I would like to add that, without thinking of the terminologies, we need to think that we are part of nature. So, we are not different than nature. We might be another species. So, cohabiting is a very important subject I think a lot of people are addressing right now. And if we learn about the cohabitation, this will be much more easier dialogue to construct on. I leave it there. I think very well articulated by both Dilip and Ravi. So I rather not say much.
Well, thank you. It's time to wrap up this discussion, and it's been a wonderful and thoughtful way to end the week. I really want to thank our three speakers, Dilip Da Cunha, Ravi Agarwal and Vibha Galhotra, for sharing with us their beautiful and powerful and political artwork and and hopefully inspiring us to go on and have more conversations about this. On behalf of the Asia Society in India and, of course, Bloomberg, I want to thank all of you who joined us tonight.